My name is Amanda Archibald. Those who I've not met before, good morning. Thank you for making your journey. I'm just trying to get started. You didn't want to introduce. I'm just getting going here.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you have anything you need to say?
Well, we have coffee in the back if you guys need coffee. The restrooms there's some here to the right in a little gray building, or you can go back to the reception area and they're right next to the reception area. And Amanda is the president of Field to Plate, and she's been doing a lot of nutritional trainings around the country, right? Around the world, maybe.
Yeah.
So we're really happy to have her, and she's really going to try to give you guys what you need so that you can help your clients, and that's really why we're here today. So take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for all your work, and don't forget to thank your graphic artist for doing that plate for me. We'll get to this plate that we have to design at the end of this presentation. So anyway, I'm Amanda Archibald. Those of you who've not met me do not know, but you will know in 10 seconds that I grew up in the UK, so that's the accent that you're hearing. British New York, as I say. So I am married to an American. I'm a naturalized American, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to live and work in this country every day, because I did not have the same opportunities to do what I'm doing in the same way in the country I grew up in. Not that they're not open to what we're doing, it's just a lot harder, a lot more red tape. So I appreciate living in the United States. So where we're going today is a result of me actually talking to Georgia at the conference in September. It was September last year where I spoke. And I presented in a very rapid way what I'm going to roll out more slowly this morning. And as a result of that presentation, I had a number of questions from the audience, but also a lot of emails afterwards from the audience asking questions. And the audience was people like yourself, working throughout this system in Pennsylvania. And I went back to Georgia and I said, well, what if I presented that once again to member agencies of the affiliated with the food bank? And I presented in a way that if I can open up this conversation with you about how we can nourish ourselves, can we take that conversation with some additional tools to our clients? And that's what I wanted to do today, was to present a way of looking under the plate, looking at food a little bit more differently so we understand more inherently what food does for us. And then can we take that conversation using tools, shop for food in a different way, pull food in a different way, put together recipes and simple menus for our clients in a different way. So that's where I'm navigating. So it's as much for you as it is for your clients. And what I'm looking for, or we're looking for at the end of the day, is are the tools somewhat useful that I'm going to present? Or if they're useful but they need to be manipulated, what can be done? So we're really looking for feedback to see if we can get this message all the way through to the clients you serve, because it's a difficult conversation. You're at the grassroots, you're on the front lines. And how can we make nutrition education accessible in meaningful ways? That's been my work for 20-something years. So I am trained in nutrition. Actually, my work, as I say, is culinary nutrition. I translate nutritional science to the plate. So I'm as comfortable in the science as I am in a kitchen. And I like that space. I call it the no man's land between when somebody gives you a piece of advice and you're standing in front of the refrigerator. I translate it. That's the most difficult space, the grocery store or in front of the refrigerator, right? Right, Chef? Right. Okay. All righty. So where we're going to start then, I decided to get rid of doing the PowerPoint because I don't do them anymore, and we'll just work right from this booklet here. So in the nearly 20 years that I've been personally working in the nourishment education field, one of the things that I've tried to achieve in that journey has been, how do we make food make sense? How do you get rid of all the noise in the food and nutrition conversation to boil it down to something that's really simple, that's graspable, no matter who you are, where you live, what you do? How do you make it make sense? So of course we do have the My Plate and the guidelines that we work with from the federal government. And what I want to do is lift up the plate and look at what's underneath today. See if that's a more useful conversation, and then map it back to that plate. So I'm going to start with a story, and those of you who heard me tell the story, bear with me and don't give any answers, okay? And add in too. So in this journey of how do we make food make sense, I was looking for things to grasp onto in this journey. And I came across a physician whose name is Daphne Miller. And Daphne is a Harvard-trained physician who works in the San Francisco area in California. And she became frustrated in her work because she said, you know, I'm trained as a physician, but I'm no longer healing people. I feel all I'm doing is writing prescriptions. And they keep coming back to see me, so clearly I'm not doing my job. It's just this, you know, revolving door. And that she found as somebody who's been taught to heal was frustrating. So the short story is, based on this frustration, she set out over a 1-year period to go around the world and visit with communities, population groups, where through her study she knew they had the lowest reported incidence of certain diseases. And what she was looking for is, what are they eating? And if I go to this part of the world, north, south, east, and west, and if I can find there's commonalities in the foods that they're eating, then maybe I've got a roadmap. Maybe I've got something to grasp onto. So she was looking for synergies in food that equated to wellness. Does that make sense? And so it's pretty hard to find groups of people who are totally well and have no disease. So she was a little smarter than that, and she said, well, let me look for the lowest incidence of chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, bowel problems, and let me look and see what they're eating and what the commonalities are, because then she would have a roadmap. So the book that speaks to this that she ended up writing is called The Jungle Effect. Did either of you go get The Jungle Effect? Rush out and get it. It's a very, very interesting book, very short, very fast read. It's written for us. There's certainly science in it, but it's not complicated science. It's a very fast read. And it's about her journey, and it's a series of different case studies. So where did she go? She went to the island of Crete, not Cyprus, okay? You hear about Cyprus in the news, it's Crete, in the Mediterranean. She went to Africa, to Ghana, I believe. She went to the Copper Canyon in Mexico. She went to Okinawa. And she went to one other place that I'm not going to disclose because that's the beginning of the food journey. You remember, right? Or do you? So the one place I don't disclose relates to one particular patient she had. And this particular patient came to Daphne as a last cause. She felt she was a lost cause, but Daphne was basically the last physician she could see because there were no pharmaceuticals left in the cabinet, as Daphne tells the story. This was a woman in her 50s, or midlife anyway, who'd had a lifelong battle with depression. And that's depression is tough. It comes in ebbs and flows, and with every ebb and every flow, she sought relief. So she kept going from one doctor to another to see if she could find relief. When she got to Daphne said, you know what, I can help you. But she said, I want to talk to you, I want to tell you that most of the way I'm going to help you is through food. And she said, let me tell you about the diet, the way people eat in the part of the world where there's the lowest reported incidence of depression, because it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Map your symptoms where there's the least amount of it, and see what they're doing, how they're living, what they're eating. And so she talked to her patient about this one place in the world where there's the least reported incidence, and I say reported, incidence of depression. So the question is, where might that be? All answers are good. Where might that be? Any ideas based on what you're hearing in the news or?
Is it Austria?
Austria? That's the first time I've heard that. Now, what made you say that?
No, I'm trying to think what I did here. And
That's
there are
interesting.
a lot of outdoor things, people spending a lot of time outdoors.
Outdoors, yeah, they do. They do. Not Austria, but I like that answer. Anywhere else you can think of. Okay. Go ahead, give a guess.
China.
China, that's a good one, China.
Butane or what?
Butane, yeah. Now you read Eat, Pray, Love, didn't you?
What?
Right after that was published, that was the answer, butane, yeah.
That they have this happiness
Yes,
thing.
yeah. Not there, but good point, yeah. Places that come up a lot from us in America are Italy and Greece, because we love to travel there. But my parents are European and have lived on the Mediterranean, in one of the Mediterranean bordering countries for years, and I can tell you plenty of miserable people on the Mediterranean, okay? Plenty. So the answer is a very unexpected place. The answer is Iceland.
That's funny. I was thinking.
You were thinking up north. Yeah, it's Iceland.
It's so desolate up there. I thought.
Exactly, it's desolate. So you think, well, that doesn't make sense, because don't we associate sunny places with happy people? That's why I mentioned the Mediterranean. It's sunny, but happy. It doesn't always go together. So you see, Iceland, isn't that dark a lot? Kind of like Alaska, isn't it dark 24 hours a day sometimes? Yes. So what is it about Iceland, this desolate, remote place? What is it people are doing, how they're living their lives, that you see this lowest reported incidence of depression? And what it comes down to is the food. And so what are they eating?
Herring.
Excuse me?
They're eating herring, aren't they?
They are eating herring. They're eating herring. They're an island. I mean, the whole world's an island, but this is an island. And of course, it's surrounded by very deep, cold water. So what do we find in deep, cold water? Fish. And the deeper, the colder the water, the fattier the fish. Makes sense, more insulated the fish. And what we find with these fatty fish is that they have a much higher ratio of omega-3 fatty acids. So we know, you probably all know that, there's a relationship between omega-3 fatty acids and brain health, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So they eat so much fish that they make the Japanese look poor in terms of fish intake, because we always think of the Japanese eating a lot of fish. The magnitude is this, that in Iceland, people may eat up to about 280 pounds of fish a year, compared to Japan, which could be 80 pounds. Huge difference. So we know that they already have an infusion of omega-3 fatty acids, critical link between omega-3s and brain health. That's established in the science. But that's not all that they're eating. So are they eating, what else are they eating from the ocean? They may eat seabirds. That's quite interesting. I found that out recently. They may eat seabirds. But they also will eat sea vegetables, which we know as seaweed. And sea vegetables are one of the highest sources of iodine, and probably the best source of iodine. Iodine mill. I was about to misspeak there. And one of the nutrients we're deficient in the United States is iodine. And it's very interesting that iodine is very critical for our thyroid to function. So we have a lot of hypothyroidism in the United States. A lot of people suffer from that. And one of the ways we can treat it actually is with iodine. It's not with everyone, but it's one of those key nutrients that's important for the way the thyroid works. Now, I don't know if they have thyroid problems in Iceland. I would imagine probably not, because of the amount of iodine they're eating, but that I haven't checked. That's where they're getting some of their sodium from, or seaweed. But also seaweed, it's a green plant, so great sources of antioxidants, tons of nutrients. They don't need salt because they've got sea vegetables. We'll come back to that. Where else are they getting these antioxidants from? What are they anyway? We'll talk about that a little later, what they are. Very interesting, they eat very little in the way of fruits and vegetables in Iceland because they're so far north, they just don't really grow. But they do have a wild crop of bilberries, which are like blueberries, that come in the early summer. And Daphne, when she was there, she said, oh my goodness, she went rushing to the store, so I'd like to buy some bilberries. And she tells the story, the retailers would just laugh at her and say, but they're free. So we're not going to carry them. Everyone knows. So they all go out and gorge on them and put them up like the way we used to and stuff themselves on them, and they freeze them. So that's basically their fruit source. Vegetables, few and far between, because they just don't grow very well. She said she tried some tomatoes, we're going in hoop houses, So not a lot in the way of fruit and vegetables, which is counter to us in the United States, where we push, fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. Well, they're building their nutrients from different sources. What else are they eating? They do eat a bread, and it's a very dark, hearty grain bread. and it's akin to, and it's made with a natural starter, kind of like our sourdoughs. And so it's natural starters are a fermented product, essentially. And fermented products, I'll come back to later, are really important to seed our guts with the right kind of bacteria that we need for healthy guts. We'll come back to that too. What else do they eat? So the bread, actually, let me stay on the bread. Mark Hyman is a physician who started the Institute for Functional Medicine, and he says this about bread: if you step on it, it bounces back, don't eat it. He said, eat the really hearty stuff when you can, because it's dense, dark, deeply full of nutrients. So that's what the Icelandic people eat. Are they eating any meat and dairy? Yeah, mutton and lamb is very prevalent in Iceland. Why? Because it's very, very rocky, and cows don't climb mountains too well, right? We know that. Pennsylvania is a farming dairy state, right, mainly. Well, not mainly, but dairy is part of your business. So I'm not sure how much beef they eat, but they definitely eat mutton and lamb. But the interesting thing about the mutton and the lamb is that what are they eating? What are these animals eating? Because it's a very rocky, kind of like moonscape place up there. And she notices that these animals actually forage on moss on the rocks, so very rocky, so moss grows on rocks. And she said it's virgin moss, so it has very little in the way of roots, so it's constantly growing. And what we know about animals who eat grass-fed or grass-raised or free-range foods is the profile of their meat is completely different when we look at the fats in it. Much higher level of those omega-3s once again. So you can see they're infusing their diet with omega-3s. They don't have to take supplements, they might be, but they're naturally from the way that from their food sources getting these omega-3s. So their food is their medicine. And the final thing that she noted, in terms of dairy, they're a very sustainable society. They live so far north. You better make use of everything that you that is feeding or on the island or growing on the island. So in terms of dairy, they eat a product that you may start to see in the stores called skyr, and that's S-K-Y-R. And skyr is like Greek yogurt in its consistency, but you will have an even more pronounced kind of lactic acid, a fermented, more sour taste. So if any of you remember or still if you make your own yogurt or you remember making yogurt, natural yogurt is sour. It's not sweet. And the sourness from this product comes from the lactobacillus bacteria. It's a naturally cultured product. And then once again, naturally cultured, naturally fermented foods are really, really important to seed wellness in our digestive tract. And that's important because your gut, what happens in your gut affects what happens in your brain. So healthy gut means a healthy brain. So you can see the Icelandic people are infusing their diet with omega-3 fatty acids, which we know are consistent with brain health, lower incidence of depression. But they're also feeding their gut, healthy brain. See what they're doing? So that's why she felt that it's the food that was really their pharmaceutical, if you will. So she talked about this to her client. Her client was not someone who ate fruits and vegetables. She would eat fast food whenever she could. She loved meat. She wasn't going to eat seafood. So when Daphne was able to take her down this path and show her some of the recipes and the ways that Icelandic people eat, she was able to hook her client on a journey towards wellness, but using food as a foundation. So Daphne practices food as medicine. You can find her on the web. Daphne spelled D-A-P-H-N-E, and then Miller. And her book is The Jungle Effect. Fascinating to listen to her. Just sometime just kind of Google her and listen to her. She'll tell her stories. But she's one of a whole cadre of physicians now who really believe that we have to go back to nutrition as our best medicine because the pharmaceutical alternatives are not working too well. We're on a treadmill. So that's the Icelandic story. But what can we take away from some of her work and the work of other researchers? I want to show you a map, basically, that I created that was the learning points from Daphne, looking around the world and saying these are the commonalities of how people eat and live in well societies. And I think that's a useful thing for us to see. So I want to share that with you. So if you turn to your page 2, you'll see that map. And then we'll move forward from there. So our first map, Making Food Make Sense. Excuse me sipping here. Everyone on the page 2? So this is the way I present information. What I didn't say in my tiny introduction there, other than I have a British accent, is I also trained as an analyst and worked as an analyst for about 5 years with a Chicago-based company. As an analyst, our job is to take a huge amount of complex information and distill it into a navigable format so you can tell a story. This is very useful in nutrition science because there's a lot of information out there. So this is a representation of the highlights from, in this case, Daphne Miller's work, from what is consistent with well-known populations around the world. So let's read it like a clock. Let's start at 11 o'clock. She found that in these well societies, people ate what's fresh, what's local, and what is in season. Because they're eating their landscape, they're eating their view. These people are living in pretty isolated areas of the world. You don't just, hop from Reykjavik to New York to go shopping. Some people might. So you can see from the Icelandic people, they mainly will gorge on fruit in the beginning of the summer, and then the rest of the year they have to gorge on whatever else they're foraging where a shipment comes in. But eat what's fresh, eat what's local, and eat what's in season. The second thing she noticed, again in more isolated societies, is that the way that they were farming and producing their food and the way they were cooking their food has not changed in hundreds of years because it works. And it's very interesting in the United States right now that we're actually kind of going back to those simpler farming techniques. We're going back to our community farms, our community producers, and our farm stands because we want to have that conversation with our producers and we want to know where our food's coming from. So that was interesting. What about fat? We're about 9 o'clock here on the chart. What about fat? She said, oh yeah, they definitely cooked with fat, but it depended on the part of the world, but mostly they were cooking with plant-based fats, so non-meat fats. And so the fats that they were using are olive oil, so for fatty fruits, olive, so olive oil, avocado, so avocado oil, coconut oil, and palm fruit oil. Very interesting. Now, we were frightened of coconut oil for a long time in the United States. Now we love it again. It is a good thing to love. Jeff, do you cook with coconut oil at home? It's a fabulous oil because if you sear anything, it does have a lower smoke point, but it gives you this perfect sear. It's fabulous. And what's interesting about coconut oil is it has an amino acid in it, lauric acid, I believe it's lauric acid. We find that amino acid in human breast milk. And so it confers immunity. So it has some immune defense properties. That's why we like to use coconut oil, so you can cook with it, and we can put it on our face too. Goes both ways. It's a universal oil. So, what about sweeteners? Sweeteners, she said, mainly folks were using that which was local. Honey, maple syrup, or agave nectar. Not processed sugar. So you can see they're using natural resources, natural sources. I'm going to skip over the lifestyle and traditions for now and just go up to 1 o'clock. What about salt? What were they using for salt? Again, we have to put it in perspective because she was visiting places that were islands as well. But there's a reason why they may be healthier because the salt came right from the ocean. I mean, literally, they have their saline source right there from the ocean. And if they weren't using salt, they would use sea vegetables for salt because it's salty. Not as salty as salt. One of the things that I tell people, a little trick because of that, what I mentioned about iodine, is a lot of the salt that's out there is iodized sea salt. You can see that, or iodized salt. That is a highly industrial salt because salt doesn't naturally have iodine in it. We add it. So this is for you. This first hour is all about me talking with you about your health. It's supposed to be on for right now. So what I recommend is if you have iodized salt, use it up, and then go get the best sea salt that you can afford, and then pop over to the natural food store and get some iodine. Get some iodine. No, don't get iodine. Get some sea vegetables, and they will be in the form of nori, or dulse, D-U-L-S-E, or wakame. Just ask in your natural food store, where's the sea vegetables? And you just open that package and you can just crush it up and just put it right with your salt. And then you have iodized sea salt. So, any way that you can get iodine in, I recommend it. All right. So, if you weren't living next to an ocean, you weren't sort of dehydrating the salt in these wonderful salt pools, is how they do it in artisan communities around the world, then where might they be getting salt from? Number one, you can actually use some root vegetables. Some of your earthy roots in your kale have a sense, they have a higher sodium content, so you could use root vegetables. But interesting enough, one of the most fascinating researchers in the United States right now is called Lauren Cordain. And people call him like the grandfather of the paleo diet movement. I don't look at him like that. His focus is on looking at traditional and ancestral societies and understanding how they eat. But he said it would not be uncommon back centuries ago that people would actually eat dirt because they're looking for the mineral. Now, I don't recommend that you all go out and eat dirt. Some people do. I've known farmers who actually taste their soil, for the mineral content. It's fascinating, especially out in the desert. I've seen that done. So we crave salt, and not only as a society, but as human beings. So I'm not sure soil went in some of the food, but you can use root vegetables for that sense of salt. What about meat and dairy? Did she find folks eating meat and dairy? Well, we already know that. But the difference she found in these societies, these well populations, is that the meat and dairy is raised very close to home, in the backyard, in the view, or within the community. And so that's number one. Number two, it would be free range or grass raised, just like the way it used to be. And number three, if an animal's life was taken, the entire animal would be used, nothing left. And that somebody posted something recently on Facebook, and I passed it along, and it said it was talking about vegetarianism, and we all make our choices whether we're vegan or vegetarian or eat meat, flexitarian, what have you. But it was an omnivore said, I understand if some people don't eat meat, but don't point fingers at us who do eat meat. You need to be pointing fingers at those who only eat 40% of the animals, throw the rest away. It's a very poignant point that it's far easier for us to harvest an animal and just eat the flesh, but the most nutrient-dense parts of the animal just got thrown away. So bones are a natural source of minerals. We all used to make bone broths. So I actually teach people how to make bone broths. Don't throw the carcass away. That's the best calcium supplement you can make, is putting those bones back in a pot and making a broth or a stock. Right, chef? That's the foundation of cuisine, right? A French cuisine, the mirepoix and the broth or the stock. But it's a calcium supplement for the rest. It's a multivitamin for us. Eating the liver, which some of us grew up with, and now we would run as far as we could. Most people, you tell them that is probably the most nutrient-rich source of vitamin A and CoQ10, which is so important for energy metabolism that you can eat. So my parents live in France. My father's French. The French are a perfect example of a society, or at least back in the day, that would eat the whole animal. The gelatins and everything. You can eat the oxtail, foie gras is the liver. It's not so nice the way that it's raised, but you get the point. They eat chitlins, which we know is yet there. The whole animal's used. And so we see among our top chefs now, it's quite vogue to not only do your own butchering, but using the entire animal again. So you see brain, heart, all these parts of the animal back on the plate. And we've moved so far away from that. I'm not saying we should rush to do it, but it's very true that in traditional societies, the most nutrient-dense part of the animal gets thrown away. Isn't that interesting? So that's what we learn in terms of meat and dairy. Dairy, not a huge amount of dairy, but in these societies, the dairy would be viewed as a way of preserving production from the animal. Not milking the cow over and over and over again, but milking the cow till there's no more milk. So the way you preserve it is in yogurts and cheeses and aged cheeses. A naturally cultured product feeds our guts. So they're not sort of sitting there drinking a pint of 3 cups of milk a day. It's when the milk runs out, but then you have the cheese and yogurt. The 2 areas that were the most interesting to me, most interesting for the science, I think, and for wellness for us, were the next 2 areas, and that is naturally fermented and cultured foods and herbs and spices. So Daphne noted that in these well populations, every single one of these populations ate naturally fermented or cultured foods. And what do we mean by that? We all recognize up to here in Pennsylvania is the sauerkraut, the natural putting up of fruits and vegetables. So sauerkraut, kimchi is another example, which we, in certain communities, will eat kimchi. So some of you may be familiar with tempeh or tempeh, miso, soy sauce, tamari sauce are traditionally fermented foods. You're probably seeing in the store something called kefir, Kefir. Are you seeing that? It's a cultured milk product that tastes a little sour. You're tasting the lactobacillus bacteria. You're tasting the cultures. Yogurt's another example, aged cheeses. Some of the chutneys. You can actually make any food a fermented food. I used to teach a whole class. I called it defensive cuisine, where all we're doing is making fermented and probiotic food. So I can make a homemade ketchup and put a probiotic culture in it, and then I have a fermented cultured product. That's a nice thing, because especially not a ketchup that we eat. I'll do that next time, Sarah. I'm going to do some fermented foods because they're so easy to do. But what's important about naturally fermented and cultured foods? They seed our digestive tract with friendly bacteria. Because in our digestive tracts, we have a constant fight with disease-forming pathogenic bacteria and friendly bacteria. So when we eat fermented and cultured foods, they put the friendly bacteria into our digestive tract. And one of the things we're battling the most right now in medicine is the preponderance of people who have bowel problems. You may have heard it as leaky gut. We have a lot of people who have the guts who have been basically perforated because of the lack of not having the right kind of bacteria in there, eating foods that are allergenic, so the whole gluten problem seems to cause a lot of distress in the gut. And one of the ways that we heal the gut is to reseed it with foods that contain these bacteria. And so these problems would have been unknown maybe in our parents' or our grandparents' time for the most part, because they were eating foods directly from the land and putting up the harvest or saving food from the animals or from the garden. So you have a naturally fermented or cultured product. See how that works? So if you see this cycle of nourishment, I will guarantee you that that's one of the hardest areas for us to work with our clients, to even get to that. That gateway into how we're going to reseed your gut, because fermented foods are not on the horizon ever, unless they're in a culture where that's part of, a relish on a plate or something like that. And yet sauerkraut is the easiest thing to make. You made sauerkraut from scratch? So easy. It's cabbage, 49 cents a pound, and salt. And I actually have some. I'll let you know. I can't feed it to you. I wish I could, but because it was made in my kitchen, I guarantee it's safe, but you can smell it at least. But we actually made it 3 weeks ago in Frederick, but it's so easy to make. It's the best medicine.
Trouble.
You had trouble? I'm coming back. We're doing the workshop.
I went online, I talked to other people,
There's a way to do it, but yeah. So the last area, because we'll spend all day talking about sauerkraut and kimchi, the last area then is herbs and spices. And she said that, again, herbs and spices were the foundation to these cuisines around the world. And you think about it, if you think about French cuisine, Italian cuisine, any Asian cuisine, Caribbean cuisine, the dish starts with spices. It starts with the aromatics, or toasting them. So aromatics can be your leeks and onions, but they can also be your cumin or your ginger, what have you. So that's the foundation. and then you build the flavor in the dish from there. What we tend to do in the United States is we'll cook it, and then we put flavor in last, and that's in the form of cheese, barbecue sauce, and ketchup. So we impose flavor top down because we're looking for it, as opposed to building it from the bottom up. What do we know about herbs and spices? We know that they are potent sources of antioxidants, and we're going to define that in just a moment. Great source of antioxidants. Depending on the herb or spice, they could be an antibiotic, they could be an antiviral, or they could be an antimicrobial, and some can be all three. Basil and sage are good examples. We know that herbs and spices can be very calming. Fennel and fennel seeds, chamomile, ginger, and your Thanksgiving spices, allspice and cinnamon and nutmeg are very calming. That's why you see them, in teas and in traditional cultures, and herbalists using these herbs and spices because they have a track record, and they have a proven track record of how they help us, how they heal us. An important part of how we think about making food and food recommendations. I say, don't give out a recipe about an herb and a spice if you can't help it, because it's free medicine. It's free medicine. So the last area on this chart is lifestyle and traditions, and then we'll just take a couple of minutes where you can just stretch, and then we'll go into, okay, how do we apply all this? So lifestyle and traditions, I used to jump over this one, whatever, I'm just going to talk about food. Until I came across the work of Dan Buettner. And did I reference him on here? No, I didn't. So Buettner is spelled B-U-E-T-T-N-E-R, Dan Buettner. And he's very well known for his work in the Blue Zones. His book is called Blue Zones, and then Thrive, the second book called Thrive. So he actually is an explorer. His father was an explorer. He's an explorer. And he actually holds amazing long-distance biking records, like 3,000 to 5,000 mile biking records. I didn't know this about him. But as a result of traveling around the world, being an explorer and a reporter / journalist, he became very interested in investigating longevity. And at the same time as Daphne Miller was doing her research, he happened to be working with National Geographic on a grant. I believe AARP was also involved in funding this project. What he wanted to do was look at what were the lifestyle traits of centenarians. So centenarians, people who live beyond the age of 100. And he wasn't just looking at the odd person here or there. There are clusters of centenarians around the world that are scientifically established by demographers. And he called them blue zones. So blue zone, Costa Rica is a blue zone. Ontario, California is a blue zone. It's large populations of Seventh-day Adventists. Okinawa is another blue zone. Sardinia, so in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Italy. And what he noticed through his work was this, from centenarians. He said that as he interviewed them, they all had a deep sense of why they were alive. They had a deep sense of purpose. They weren't sort of saying, well, what am I doing on this earth? What am I going to do tomorrow? Even if they didn't have a penny to rub together, they knew why they were alive. The second thing he noticed was a deep sense of connectivity. And by this he meant that when he was interviewing these centenarians, he said it was very hard to get alone time because it was like a revolving door. There was always somebody coming in to visit, whether it was a sibling, a great-great-grandchild, a neighbor checking on them. He said there was always a connection. And then beyond that, he said what was a common trait was that these people could trace their friends back to their childhood. So they had friends all the way, say, from kindergarten, all the way till when they passed away. So deep-rooted connectivity and friendship. He said among the centenarian societies, he noticed a deep respect for them as elders. They were honored for their knowledge and their longevity and their wisdom. They weren't shuttled away to, hey, go live in the retirement home. They were at the center of the family, kind of like Native American communities. And finally, he noticed that movement was a daily part of their life. There were no gym passes, obviously where he was. I don't know if there's a gym on Sardinia, maybe in a hotel, but it was a pretty rugged island. So movement was a natural part of their life. And that spirituality or a day of rest was a cornerstone, a keystone for them. Meaning that every week they would take a day of rest. Didn't mean to say they went to church necessarily, but they said there's a day when we stop. Every X days we stop, we commune with nature, we stop what we're doing. How far that is from us, right? So his work was fascinating. And even more fascinating when I found a paper that was written by Mark Hyman. I mentioned Mark Hyman before. He's a physician who's very worthwhile following. He writes very easily for us. Fascinating guy. Hyman spelled Hyman. And Mark founded the Institute for Functional Medicine. And the Institute for Functional Medicine really is a body, an educative or educational body of physicians who are prodding us healthcare providers and physicians to grasp food as medicine again, to go back, to step away from the medication cabinet when we can and put food back in there. And he's leading the charge for physicians to do that and retraining them in what we call functional medicine. So just to end this segment, I'd just like to read something to you. He wrote this in 2005, and Buchanan published his work in 2007. And so what he writes is the mind-body connection, mind and body has been well established, but perhaps a more critical and primary link to our ill health and all these stress disorders that we have, the mind-body community connection, has escaped both the conventional and integrative medical worlds. He writes, the disintegration of communities, the separation of families, the intrusion of culture into our lives, the migration of the population from region to region for work or leisure, the lack of rich social and family networks all prevent the normal buffering from trauma and stress humans have received throughout time through the support of tribes and large families. The loss of refrigerator rights is a fundamental problem in our culture that has insidious and continuous effects on our health. How many people in your immediate social network can come over to your house, walk over to your fridge, and help themselves to leftovers? How many people in your circle or in your town can afford you that right? The loss of close, intimate connections creates a broad echo of isolation and distress and underlies the difficulties we have in recovering from stress. Isolation plays a key role in the ever-expanding incidences of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorders we see in our practices. So we hire therapists and trainers, advisors, and coaches to fill the void caused by the lack of people in our circle with refrigerator rights. Very, very interesting. When I read that, I decided that I would not skip over the lifestyle and tradition part of the chart because it is as important as food and medicine itself. If we were leaving off from that big roadmap, how do we take that and distill it into something that's useful, into something that's smaller? So what I did is I teased all the way through the big map we just went through, looking for commonalities in the science. Say, if we eat this way, what are we getting from this type of food, or what are we getting from that type of food? What is the science behind it? And so I want to show you the very basic roadmap that is the science behind where we're going to have for the rest of the day. So it kind of grows from here. So on your page 3 now, what you have is a very distilled map. That's what the science of what I've been talking about looks like. And so I'm going to take you through this. And this is my version of the plate. Oh my goodness, that doesn't look anything like my plate from the government. That's because what I did is I lifted up the plate and looked underneath and said, this is what you really need to know. That, you know, eating the fruits, the vegetables, the grains, the dairy. What does it really mean? So underneath all of that is a map that looks like this. So let's talk about it. So my map is, if I'm talking to someone, you know, whether they're well or unwell, the fundamentals of eating don't change. You need to eat a lot of antioxidants. We're going to explain all this. You need to eat a robust amount of omega-3s. Sounds boring, doesn't it? It won't be when you understand it. You need to eat foods that are rich in potassium and sulfur. And that's going to be very interesting to uncover why that's important. Foods that get absorbed slowly. Foods that feed your gut. We touched on that a little bit. Foods for digestion. And whatever we do, plenty of herbs and spices because it's free medicine. We already touched on that. So let's start with antioxidants. Why is it that they're important? And oh, by the way, just so you know, if you don't want to write anything, but you need to make your own notes, you go on the next page, I've explained everything. There's the answers, okay? Just so you know, but I want you to take your own notes. So that's your blank. I sort of re-explain and lay it out for you in very simple terms that you potentially could use later if you're talking to your clients. But I want to give you the backstory, okay? So starting with antioxidants, why do we keep talking about them? Why are they so important? And who cares anyway? So antioxidants, I'll go back to Mark Hyman, the physician that I enjoy so much, who founded the Institute for Functional Medicine, getting doctors moving towards food again. He said this: if you back your car up into the concrete post and you dent it, yeah, we've done that, right? You know, in the parking lot or whatever. My husband did it with a trailer recently. My car, his trailer. Thanks, Don. My dent. Sure enough, what happens is it rusts because that dent is, the paint is cracked and it's exposed to oxygen. The key part there is oxygen. Oxygen is very corrosive to us. So a natural byproduct of eating, and what we're trying to do when we eat is solicit energy from food. And then that energy drives the systems, our biochemistry, our physiology in our body, basically. But the end product of eating, we actually produce oxygen. And oxygen left unattended is like a teenager with the keys to a cabinet you don't want he or she to get into. In other words, they're like teenagers that left unattended will cause havoc, wreak havoc. Okay? Makes sense? Same with oxygen. It's very, very unstable. That's where the idea of free radical comes from. End product of actually eating is you produce oxygen, and it doesn't have both of its electrons, so it's unstable. So because it's unstable, it's going to look around the body to find another buddy to stabilize it. So instead of standing on one leg, it's going to stand on two. Where does it find that stability? From antioxidants. So the analogy here is, if you think about oxygen, that bump in your car, what have you, if it's exposed to air, it rusts. If our body is continuously exposed to oxygen or stress, it rusts as well. It's the same analogy. So, and rust is like inflammation in our body. So the root cause of illness is inflammation. Inflammation is like rust. So to prevent rust, literally, we need antioxidants. They're stabilizers. That's a very interesting thing to tell people because you can get the image right away. And then we don't have to beg people fruits and vegetables. You want to stand on two legs, you need antioxidants. Very hard to get them if you don't eat fruits and vegetables or some of your whole grains. So think about that analogy. If you're interested in where you find antioxidants, I gave you a map on page 5, so you can actually look. I'm not going to go into that. But, you read in the medical science, okay, eat blueberries because they've got this, or they're a flavonoid, or they're quercetin, or beta-carotene. I can't keep it straight. Here's the map that keeps it straight, okay? That basically tells you what families fit into antioxidants, what their names are, what their cousins are, what the food is, okay? So that's why I like to use maps, because you have a lot of information you put on one piece of paper and it shows where everything fits. But the main message is antioxidants prevent rust. They're stabilizers in your body. That's why we need them. Left unattended, they will bump into all your cells and your tissues, cause a lot of damage, and that's called disease. Simple, huh? That's the basic tenet of antioxidants. Okay. What about, if anyone has any questions as I go along, just ask away, okay? What about omega-3s, these things that we keep hearing about? What about them? Well, we know that there's 3 things to take away. We know that there's a relationship between omega-3s and brain health. We'll talk about that. There's a relationship between omega-3s and heart health. We'll talk about that. And they are also potent anti-inflammatories. And I'm going to talk about that too. So, number one, brain health. So, the brain is about 80% fat. It's made up of all kinds of different fats, but 40% of the polyunsaturated fat in your brain is an omega-3, it's DHA. So you kind of like, you can think of it 40%, if you will, of the fat in your brain is DHA. DHA is found in human breast milk. That's why we want moms to breastfeed as much as they can. It's a direct source of nutrition. Norman Cordain was interesting recently. He's a researcher I mentioned earlier. He said, you know, if you look at cow's milk is very high in protein, very low in DHA. That's why you have big cows, small heads, small brains. They're not feeding the brain. As human breast milk is completely different. It's robustly full of DHA. But DHA and omega-3s are also really important because around our nerves we have a protective cover. It's called an myelin sheath. And a key part of the cover of that sheath is our omega-3s. So they are important. Like if you were to plug a lamp into the wall, omega-3s would be the equivalent of sending the electrical current from the wall to the light bulb. So they're really, really important in connectivity, connectivity. That's why it's so important that we supplement pregnant moms with omega-3s and also after the child is born. One research recently said there's two really important parts of our lives where we desperately need omega-3s. The first 2 years and the last 2 decades. First 2 years to develop the neurons and the cognitive ability. Last 2 decades to prevent the decline. Where do we see decline in mental acuity? Last 2 decades of our lives. And that's where we see a decrease in the amount of omega-3s that people are taking in, or the decrease in the connectivity. So we use omega-3s to ramp up that connectivity, that neuroconnectivity. So that's number one. That's great. But everything about omega-3 is critical. Number two, heart health. If you were to look on the internet for why is omega-3 important, you get a laundry list this long, and anything associated with your heart is in there. So I sort of went in and said, well, what are the takeaways? What's the nitty-gritty of how we can imagine why this is so important for heart health? And it comes back to something relatively simple, which I'll try and explain clearly here, that we in the United States in the last 2 to 3 decades have gone from on this low-fat, high-carb diet. Remember? We kind of all went to the low-fat and eat your snack wells era, what have you. Well, many of us, even though we've improved our diet, we still have a very high carbohydrate diet. Because if you look at, if you eat out, everything comes on a piece of bread, in a piece of bread, on dough, on a wrap. It's carbohydrate, 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 or it's in the form of a soda. And what happens? So we have a very glucose-based diet. So what happens in the body is your body, especially from carbohydrates are converted to glucose. Glucose is converted to glycogen. That's the storage form of sugar in the body. But the body can only store so much glycogen. Then you have this spillover, and the liver's like, okay, what am I going to do with all this extra sugar? It packages it as fat, as triglycerides. So triglycerides, the backbone, and the fatty acids are kind of like a fence post, fence rails. And that's how the body stores it as fat. Omega-3s are able to get in there and prevent or stop the fixing of those the fatty acids to the backbone. So if you're constructing a fence, it stops you putting the rails on the fence to construct a fence. And it'll send those fatty acids not into storage, but into energy production. So for people, you may have seen this because you had high cholesterol, so maybe sometimes your triglycerides are high. So what we try and do is reduce the amount of carbohydrates in your diet, increase omega-3 supplements so we can stop those fats going into storage and push them to energy production. That's what one of the roles of omega-3 seems to be. And so if you don't create as many triglycerides, then you don't form cholesterol. We can control your cholesterol too. But the key is it's coming from carbohydrates, not fats. Now the medical community, scientific community will argue back and forth on this. They'll say, no, fats give you heart disease. But the science is really saying, no, a high carbohydrate diet is really the culprit because it pushes all the energy into fats. So omega-3 stops, as much as it can, reduces that storage of fat. Really important thing to remember. So if fats went on, the liver was overwhelmed, as it often is with high fructose corn syrup derived food, those overwhelm the liver. The liver packages fats as fast as it can into triglycerides, put a nice protein on it, and sends it out into the body. And that we know as a very low density lipoprotein, a VLDL. You might see that sometimes on your labs. As that floats around the body, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and that becomes your LDL. If the source of those fats comes from carbohydrate, you will have what we call a heavy low-density lipoprotein. That is a very reactive product. It's like that rabid teenager again. It goes around the body and it bumps into the cell walls or the lining of your blood vessels and causes damage. We know that as a plaque or a scab. The more damage it causes, the bigger the plaque or the bigger the scab, if you will, the smaller the blood vessels get, the harder your heart has to beat to push blood around the body. So it starts with the diet. You see that? So that's a very simple explanation of what's going on in the heart disease. People may explain that in different ways, but that's the image for you. But it's the carbs that are the problem. They are the problem. And the third thing is inflammation. So I want to show you probably the most complicated chart you'll see. And you can just put a big line through it if you don't care to even look at it. But I want to show you something that I think is absolutely critical to understanding omega-3s, particularly because you hear about omega-3s and omega-6s. And after this, it gets easy, okay? On your page 6 real quick, that is just a chart of where do I find omega-3s. That's it, where do I find them? And you'll see they're divided into plant and animal sources, okay? There's a big difference, and you'll see that in the next chart. So this is very useful for you. It'll be useful actually when you're shopping out here in the pantry. You're trying to put things together, meals together. Where am I going to find omega-3s? How am I going to balance out this plate? Because you have to work pretty hard to find them. So, time to get here. I promise this will make so much sense in 3 minutes. So you're probably hearing a lot about omega-3s and omega-6s. Everybody heard those terms? Yeah, omega-3s, omega-6. And you're not supposed to have as many omega-6s as you are omega-3s. That's what we're hearing. Here's what we know. Here's how out of balance we are. Then I'll explain this chart. If we were to go back and look at the way traditional societies eat, or some of the societies that Daphne Miller visited, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 would be about somewhere between 2 to 4 to 1. Let's call it 4 to 1. In America, the ratio is 22 to 1. We are that far out of whack. And that is because your omega-6s are found predominantly in our processed food. Why? Because they're coming in the form of our seed oils, like our sunflower, our safflower, canola, maybe soybean oil. We're a soybean growing country, and that ends up in our food. Potent source of omega-6s. What is wrong? Well, so you can see where some of the clients you're serving, why they have so many, may have so many chronic medical problems, because they are just being infused with omega-6 fatty acids and can't balance it out with omega-3. So let me have you look down this pathway really quick. If you start omega-6 on the left-hand side there, you kind of follow it down about 1, 2, 3, 4, to the 5th box. It says arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the step that once you step off of that to the left where it says eicosanoid synthesis, that is an inflammatory pathway. And so let's talk about inflammation just really quickly here. You need a balance with inflammation. Omega-3 and omega-6 balance themselves out. If you cut yourself and you'll get some blood and swelling and then it heals. That is an inflammatory process we need. What we don't need is an inflammatory process that we call low-grade inflammation. And low-grade inflammation comes when you eat a lot of omega-6s and that arachidonic acid is pushed into what we call this eicosanoid synthesis. these are prostaglandins. So they are very, very inflammatory, but they're being stoked by a fire that comes from your diet. In other words, this is not traumatic inflammation, it's constant poking. Does that make sense? So how do you stop that poking? You change the omega-3s, omega-6 ratio, so you're eating, we'll talk about that in a moment. But one of the ways doctors stop that poking, literally, is that if you were to put a circle after where it says icosanoid, and you put the word aspirin or Tylenol or acetaminophen in there, that stops that process. They're painkillers. Isn't that interesting? If you were to put a circle between where it's between arachidonic acid and icosanoid, and you put steroid there, that's how we stop the pathway a little further up. But you can stop that pathway completely or mostly by changing what you eat. That's why I wanted to show you the pathway. Okay, so let's go on the omega. Does that make sense? So you can see why this is such an important slide to show. And it's hard to see without looking at all the paths. So go to the omega-3 side. Go all the way to the bottom. No, stay on this slide. Go to the omega-3 side of the same slide. Go all the way to the bottom. And what you see is DPA. You see the bottom three boxes, EPA, DPA, and DHA. You keep hearing about EPA and DHA. Why is it that we recommend that you take a supplement or you eat seafood or robust sources or natural sources of EPA and DHA? Because the omega-3s are already in a form that your body can use. That's why they're so important. If you eat an omega-3 from a plant source, and it's robustly available in your leafy greens, your cruciferous vegetables, your winter squash. In most vegetables, you'll find omega-3 in micro quantities. The problem is the body doesn't convert that form very well, and it fights with omega-6 over the same enzyme. So look at the top of your chart. You've got omega-3. There's a little diamond that says diet, and underneath that it says enzyme, and enzyme's a catalyst. Those two fight over the same enzyme. The winner is the one that has the most amount of men on the field, and that is usually omega-6. So if omega-6 can grab that enzyme and convert, which is sheer force, then omega-3s cannot convert to EPA and DHA. That's the problem. So how do you stop that? You either eat a diet rich in seafood and or supplement omega-3 because it'll give you the EPA and DHA, or you totally reduce foods that contain omega-6, up your fruits and mainly your vegetables, and then the body will convert your omega-3s efficiently all the way down that pathway. So it's a roadblock. That's why we also want you to eat robust fruits and vegetables and lower the amount of foods that come out of boxes, because if you start reading labels, you'll see omega-6 in there in all forms of seed oils. They're a big red flag for us. That makes sense? So when you hear, like, eat walnuts, eat flax seeds, we're feeding the omega-3 side, but we're feeding it at that second box level, at alpha-linolenic acid, and the body's got to go through that conversion to get it to a form we can use it. So either you eat it in its form that we can use it right away, or you have to get rid of the omega-6s. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Finally, omega-3 and omega-6 makes sense. What I will tell you is what is so challenging, particularly when you're working with hungry like you are, and people who consistently have more month than money. Finding omega-3s and getting them is it's a wasteland. And I really, honestly, I've said this for a long time, feel that we need to be offer a supplement free of charge. I really do not want to give things away, but I don't know how else to get omega-3s into the diets of so many Americans, particularly if they don't eat fish. And if they're eating packaged food, which many are, how on earth are we going to get the omega-3s that they need? And you know how important they are.
Is a supplement, like you're talking about a pill?
A fish oil supplement, yeah.
Is that just as good as eating the regular food? Or,
well,
I mean,
you know, food in its natural source has its natural synergies. So we always want the natural, but we have to be practical. But here's the other thing. Really good omega-3 supplements are expensive. They can be $25 to $30 for a 30-day supply at least.
And
So
how do
it's
you know
out
you
of-
have really good ones or?
Well, there's definitely companies we know. But yeah, if you're going to Trader Joe's or Costco, I mean, I can't tell you how good they are.
Yeah.
So then we have another issue. So it's a public health problem, I would say, and it crosses all socioeconomic boundaries.
So I have a question, clarifying with the omega-3 and omega-6 pathway. They both take off to synthesize eicosanoids.
Yes, they do. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, the omega-3 say anti-inflammatory and the other one's
Yes, so
anti-inflammatory.
after eicosanoids, I promise this is the last big biochemistry, okay, but I think it's important to understand it. So you can see it and then look back at this. So eicosanoid is this big family within the sort of immune system, if you will. After eicosanoids, they can go off into a number of different directions, but there's a family called the prostaglandin family, and there's 3 families within that, 3 groups. There's prostaglandin 1, 2, and 3. Prostaglandin 2 is on the 2 and 1 are on the omega-6 side, I believe 1 is. 2 is very, very inflammatory. The prostaglandin 3 is on the omega-3 side, anti-inflammatory. That's the difference. But they're a seesaw. So omega-6, so the prostaglandin side on the omega-6 side will cause bleeding. We want bleeding, if we have trauma, we want it to bleed and heal. So that's the omega-6 side. Omega-3 will prevent blood clotting. So you need a balance. That's why we say one is pro-inflammatory and one is anti-inflammatory. They do balance each other out, but when they're way out of whack, which is what's happening with our diets, we see a lot of chronic diseases. I could go on and on. There's a lot more we could talk about with that. But does that clarify that? Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, how are we doing so far? We got through the omegas. We got through antioxidants. Quick time check here. If you go back to your map, we've done antioxidants, omega-3s. Those are the toughest ones to understand. The next 2 are really interesting. You may not have heard about this before. Eating sulfur-rich foods and eating potassium-rich foods. First thing is, if you eat foods that are full of potassium, you're probably eating foods that are full of sulfur. What are we talking about here? Let's put it in perspective. Again, looking at the research. Our forefathers ate a diet that probably had about 800 milligrams of sodium in it. Our diet is somewhere between 2,800 and 3,300 milligrams of sodium. Potassium, their diets were about 7,000 milligrams a day. We're lucky if we're at 2,800 milligrams a day. And the difference is they were eating a diet full of vegetables, mainly foraging, like roots, nuts, seeds, fruits, but robust amount of foliage, we're not. So the lower the amount of potassium-containing food, mainly vegetables you eat and fruit, normally the higher the sodium. We have to change that. Where do you find sulfur? Well, let me just give you an analogy as to why sulfur is important. Most of the people have not talked to you about your liver, but you are what you absorb, which is your gut. But you're only as healthy as your body's ability to get rid of the waste it doesn't need. So a natural process of eating, we produce waste, we have to get rid of that. But in this world, our bodies are also huge sponges for toxins. And I'm talking about car exhaust, eating foods that's been raised with pesticides or fungicides, taking hormones, birth control, medications. They're all can be extremely destructive and corrosive to our bodies. And they get stored in our fat. So when people actually lose weight and they don't feel well, it's because their body is losing fat and it's releasing all that junk into the bloodstream. So that's why that happens. All that to say, your liver is responsible for getting the junk out of your body, and it does it in a pathway that we call detoxification. Detoxification, getting rid of the toxins. 3 phases, and I'll align it with putting out your trash. Phase 1 is akin to you putting trash in your trash can in the kitchen, or on your compost, your compost scraps in the kitchen. Phase 2 is akin to you emptying that trash can out in your trash can outside. And phase 3 is when you put the trash can out on the curb and municipalities pick it up and take it to the landfill. So your liver works in the same way. 3 phases. It cannot do it without sulfur. If you don't have sulfur in your diet, your liver gets backed up and junked up and gummed up. It's the bottom line. So then the question comes, where do you find sulfur? You find sulfur in dark green leaves. There they are. So our collards are kale. Chard actually is not a source of sulfur. Neither is spinach, but it doesn't mean to say they don't have other qualities. Okay? So don't think you can't eat those. Where else? In your cruciferous family. So cruciferous, all your cabbages, everything from your Savoy, your red cabbage, your Napa cabbage, your bok choy, all the Chinese cabbages, sulfur containing.
Broccoli.
All your, excuse me?
Broccoli.
That's a brassica. So the broccoli and cauliflower are right in there. They're sulfur containing. You can smell it. But the other area, other vegetables include your spicy vegetables like your mustard greens, your radishes and horseradish, arugula and watercress. Yeah, they're actually cruciferous. I even learned that. And if you eat sushi, wasabi. Who knew? Wasabi is sulfur containing, so, you know, who knew? These are critical to make those pathways work. So once again, if you don't eat vegetables, you can kind of see the body backing up. It cannot get rid of those toxins, which are a normal part of living. And just to illustrate just how many nutrients you do need, some of the vegetables. So don't get scared by this. What it's actually showing you, there's a phase 1. We have key nutrients we need in phase 1. And then there's phase 2, and all those nutrients are critical for that site to work. And what's even more interesting is if you don't have these nutrients in the right place, phase 1 can back up. And then you have a situation where you actually have some pretty nasty molecules that are floating around in your body, can do some damage, which is why you need those antioxidants. Again, if phase 1 gets backed up, the antioxidants will step in and try and take care of those radical beings, if you will. But notice about 2 o'clock on this chart, sort of on the outer edge, I put some spices in there. It says clove, cinnamon, thyme, turmeric, oregano, black pepper. When I'm formulating recipes, if I happen to be working clinically, which I do a little bit, I formulate with those spices all the time because I know what they do. So in my work, I use a lot of citrus. I use a lot of spices because I know what they're doing. They're therapeutic. They make your liver work. Yeah.
What's rosemary good for?
Rosemary actually traditionally is a salve. You know, it has a topical soothing. But it's an antioxidant. It's green. It's an antioxidant, so use it. Yeah, but it does have some other therapeutic values that off the top of my head I can't tell you. There's a wonderful herbalist called Rosemary Gladstar, whose book you can get at the library anytime. She does beautiful work explaining what all these herbs and spices do and then how to use them. So yesterday I knew I had this cough coming on. I knew I could make a decoction is when you infuse and cook spices for a period of time. So I use like licorice root and marshmallow root and cinnamon and ginger. I wouldn't have known that without her. Did it work? I don't know. I'm talking today, but I love it because it's like homemade medicine. So it's super. So now you know potassium and sulfur. Really, really important. Yeah.
When dealing with vegetables that may have pesticides or other things, is there an effective way to wash them so that you remove some of them, or is it just best to skin them? Because we like to juice.
Yes.
And so normally I take the skin off the apples and the pears, but what's the best way?
Well, if they're not organic, then I agree with what you say. Wash them well, and yeah, if you can take the peel off. But there is, if you go to the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, they keep a list. And it's a changing list of which fruits and vegetables have the highest pesticide treatment. So that's it. So that way, you know, you could get away with juicing some things because they may have a much lower content. But in the end, you know, it's all offensive to our body. It is. All these growing tactics. It's difficult. It's a difficult conversation. And it's a political one too. So yeah, as best you can, step away. Alrighty, so if we go back to our map, finishing off then, on our page 3, we've done the left side. Do you see how we're looking underneath the plate? I lifted up the plate to give you much deeper insights into why these foods are so important. Slow release foods. Really quickly there, what I'm talking about there is eating foods that keep our blood sugars as smooth as silk. Because what we know is if we constantly eat carbohydrates, we constantly ask our body to produce insulin. Insulin is how we control our blood sugars. I think that's a known in this room. But what is happening with our population is the more we eat, the more we solicit an insulin response, the more ho-hum our body gets about insulin. It's like, okay, out comes insulin again. My blood sugar's high. Well, we don't care. We're just not going to behave. So now we have a situation where we have high blood sugar and we have high circulating insulin. And the higher the blood sugar, the more the body asks you to produce insulin, because having high blood sugar is not consistent with life for a long time. So what the two key things about high levels of insulin is very inflammatory. It is. It's its own inflammation indicator. And we know this from the science. That's why we like to try and control and get it under control. So how do we get it under control? We don't keep asking it to perform. So we reduce the amount of carbohydrates we're eating. Again, when you look at what our clients are eating, the most affordable foods are the ones that are doing the most damage because they're carbohydrates. That's not just carbohydrates, but just you look at the tilt of what's in their diets, and we're constantly asking their body to have insulin come out to play. The other thing about insulin is insulin stores fat. It's a hormone that controls sugar because it pushes sugar into a storage form, either glycogen or fat. It stores fat. When insulin is when your insulin is in your bloodstream, its cousin or its polar opposite cannot be available. So if you have high levels of insulin, you cannot burn fat because its counterpart is called glucagon. It's usually one or the other, either insulin's out or glucagon. Low levels of insulin, higher levels of glucagon, burn fat. So you can imagine with people who are eating carbohydrates all the time and they're constantly soliciting that insulin response, they can't burn fat because insulin turns off glucagon. Sometimes you can. There's a situation where you can have both together, and then that's a nightmare because nothing's working, right? But you see that? It's an on-off switch. So these low levels of, I'm going to come to these low, trying to control the switch that prompts insulin is the key. Yeah?
Question. If one has a family history of diabetes and all that good stuff, can you manipulate it to not have it affect you with what you're saying?
Yes. We're seeing that, and it's been a big question recently because I myself have actually asked that. I don't myself work with people with diabetes, mainly because I'm teaching a lot and I'm doing the culinary side of work. But I did ask a forum recently, can we literally control diabetes by removing most of the carbohydrates in the diet? And the answer is yes. Have we done clinical trials? No. But with doctors who are practicing integrative medicine, sort of mind-body medicine, yes. I don't know about that's type 2 diabetes, though. Type 1, there's been some recent research, and I really can't really quote it, but there was one case that we read recently with a young child with type 1 diabetes that they were able to control it through diet, but it could be because he was very young. So I don't want to quote beyond that. But yes, you can manage diabetes by changing what we call the substrates and making your body work efficiently. Absolutely. Yes. All right. So if you're really interested in that topic, there's a very, very interesting book by a fellow called Gary Taubes, Taubes, and it's called Good Calorie, Bad Calorie, and he talks extensively about this. In fact, as a researcher / journalist, he was really interested in answering the question, does fat cause heart disease? And his conclusion was, I can't definitively say that fat causes heart disease, but I can say that insulin is extremely inflammatory and involved in heart disease.
What was
See
the
the
name of the
relationship.
book?
Good calorie, bad calorie. Big book. Fascinating, fascinating. It wasn't very popular with a lot of scientists, you could tell, because they wait, we've been telling people for years that fat causes heart disease, and it plays a role. The community is still very, very divided over it, but insulin is very inflammatory. It seems to be more closely or equally as correlated with heart disease, I would say. To end this set, foods for digestive wellness. Here's what we need to know, because I talked about it a little bit already. That, let me give you an analogy here from Dr. Mark Laponis. He said that when you grow plants, they need good soil to grow, to flourish and to nourish you. He said, think of your gut as the soil of your body. You have to feed the soil of your body so that you can be healthy. I think it's a nice analogy. And the way you feed the soil of your body is by taking in foods that are rich in probiotics. Foods rich in probiotics we talked about already. On the dairy side, your cultured yogurts, not your sweet yogurts, but your cultured yogurts, your aged cheeses, kefir. So these are on the dairy side, K-E-F-I-R. On the non-dairy side, you have what I talked about earlier, the miso, tamari, tempeh, and your traditionally put up products, your fermented pickles, your sauerkraut. And what you start to see in the stores, I don't know up here yet, but I've seen it down in Frederick, Maryland, we now have local farms producing the age-old pickles. So I've had pickled radishes, pickled beets, pickled cabbage. And so what I do personally, I make my own at home. But what I do is I put a couple of tablespoons of those a day on my plate. That's my medicine. If you don't want to do dairy, and a lot of people can't, here's the other way. The other thing you can do is take a probiotic. If you have to, that's expensive, very expensive, especially for good ones. So it makes sense to eat foods that will seed your gut. Yeah.
What's miso again?
Miso is a fermented soy paste. Yeah, I know.
Doesn't sound very appetizing.
Oh, it's delicious. Actually, it has a lot of umami, a lot of kind of savory notes to it.
So how would you eat fermented?
So what you actually do, you'll use it to create a sauce or to flavor a dish. Yeah, I actually use it. I'm not using it today, but I'll actually use it to make a salad dressing, for example. So there's lots of ways you can.
Do you know it by heart, the salad dressing recipe?
I will send it to you.
Okay.
It's a miso ginger. It's delicious.
I love ginger.
Yeah,
Okay.
good. So those age-old traditions, the good old home ec, actually was medicine for us, but we've lost it. So you can't so you have the probiotics. So they will seed your gut. They actually can make certain vitamins. They can make biotin and vitamin K. Very useful. They protect the lining of your gut by producing foods that feed the cells that line your gut. But they're only valuable to us if you feed them. So first you have to seed them, then you have to feed them. And that's where prebiotics come in. So prebiotics are not themselves a food. They are foods that contain certain kinds of fiber, you'll probably know that as inulin, that the probiotics feed on. What are sources of inulin? They're quite robust, actually. Your apples and pears, wheat, bananas, artichokes, asparagus, chicory are some of them. Some of them. If you eat fruits and vegetables, for the most part, you'll be able to get inulin. So the idea with the gut is we call weed, seed, and feed. We weed out that which hurts us. We seed with good probiotics, and then we feed them with the fibers they need so they can be robust. What's happening with people is they don't have wheat feed or seed going on, wheat, seed, feed, and so their guts are, we call it dysbiosis. The bacterial population is totally upside down. They have yeast overgrowth, they have mold, they have pathogenic bacteria. It's very, very common, and they're very sick. And that manifests itself with things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, aches and pains, I don't feel well, arthritis, all these, these symptoms like I just don't feel well and I ache all over, that would be a classic where we look at the gut and say, you have to clean the gut. Because if we don't get that all cleaned up, you are not going to feel well. So I would say that was probably the most chronic thing we see in medicine right now is the gut, the digestive tract. We have to soothe it like a baby. So finally on our map, herbs and spices we already talked about. That, they're free medicine. Use them. It doesn't really matter if we know what they do on a daily basis. It does therapeutically, but on a daily basis, use them. And one that you might want to recommend as you're thinking, if you work with your clients, is cinnamon. Because diabetes is so robust in our society. Cinnamon at a therapeutic level now, but you can just introduce it into recipes and meals if you're recommending them. Cinnamon does seem to have a soothing effect on blood sugars. That we know from the science. So any which way you can get it in, great. The other spice I would recommend would be ginger, as much as you can. It's a lovely flavor. Many of the clients we serve are very comfortable with it. It's part of their culture. Fresh is great, but it's out of sight for a lot of people, so you use dry. But anyway, you can use ginger. And what I didn't mention in the sulfur area is garlic, onions, chives, leeks, and shallots are all sulfur containing. So anytime you can use those, you put a little bit of sulfur in the diet. I forgot to mention that to you.
Can you freeze ginger?
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, I freeze it and then grate it. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Did you say you grated after you freeze?
You can do it both ways.
Both ways.
Yeah, both ways. I use it a lot, so it doesn't stick around, but you can definitely freeze it and cut off what you need. And yeah, frozen things are often a lot easier to grate once
I
after
just
the-
bought one the other day.
They
That's why I want to know how to chop it up.
Good for you. Okay, so we got through our map. Does this make sense? Does this make sense? Yes.
What are some slow release foods?
Slow release foods. Good question. Thank you for asking. I just whizzed right through that.
You did.
Legumes or beans are a slow release. Anything that doesn't have carbohydrate in it is going to be a slower release.
Okay.
Your whole grains, but I'm talking whole grain, not processed. Not an ingredient where the fifth ingredient is wheat or a whole grain. Nuts and seeds. So the key there, because we could send a lot of red flag to people, like pasta and rice are very important in our communities. So what you want to think of is not taking that away, but how can I add fat and protein in there? Because fat and protein slows down absorption. It's when we have pasta with a minimal amount of sauce and a bunch of bread. Hello. Sounds like the average, eat out Italian meal. That's a problem. A big stromboli is a big problem because it's a huge dose of carbohydrate with very little fat or protein. So just think about that. Don't be afraid of the fat.
Now, we've come to understand there's good fats and bad fats, and I think carbohydrate can kind of be looked at in that way too.
Yes.
Simple carbohydrates, I think, is what you're really talking about, is
Yes.
the culprits that provoke the insulin, because the complex carbohydrates, like legumes, plant-based
Slow
diet
down, yes.
is a high carbohydrate diet. So it's not just all carbs are bad,
Correct.
because there are
It's-
many carbs that are slow release, that are
Exactly.
high in all these things you're talking about.
Exactly. Thanks for the clarification. I think it's a good point because fruits and vegetables are inherently high in carbohydrate, but they're not high in these, not high in highly processed carbohydrates, and not high in, some fruits are high in fructose, not high in natural glucose, if you will. So the problem comes when we take food out, we extract food from its natural environment, put it in another environment, and then it's rapidly absorbed. So, but it's a journey. Thank you for that clarification. Our body has to work a lot harder to digest legumes and whole grains than it does to digest sugar. That's for sure. But the other thing in that starch area is, of course, one of the things that I grew up in the UK, but here in the United States, we love to eat starchy vegetables. We love potatoes. I do. I love them. And we love the sweeter, like tropical fruits. And of course, those are the ones that get absorbed a lot faster than our slower, sort of heavier roots and greens and our apples and pears. So there's even a distinction among the fruits and vegetables. Yeah.
What are some foods that are rich in sodium if you're trying to cook salt-free? I know celery has like a certain amount of sodium. And also, is it better to use sea salt if you're using salt?
Yeah, we actually, you may have come in afterwards, we
I
did
did.
talk a titty bit about that. Yeah, that sea salt has more micronutrients in it than your industrialized iodized salt. So I definitely recommend sea salt. And not to be afraid to cook with salt, because when you cook from scratch, you can control salt. It's when you don't cook from scratch, you can't control it. So, and when I look at controlling sodium, I don't get so involved in sodium. I get involved in how can I tip the balance to higher potassium. And that you'll get robustly through fruits and vegetables. So don't look at it like this. Look at what I can open it up to as opposed to what I need to stay away from. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a different, looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
A lot of sodium, our problem with sodium is coming from the food choices and the packages, not necessarily the fresh foods. Okay, so we got through the Antioxidant Map. Where and how does this relate to anything? If we switch from talking about us to talking about, is there an application for, what I did is I took, this is the map that you just looked at. In the purple boxes, I simplified all the science I just talked about so it's like a soundbite. But in the outer boxes, what I actually did is I looked at, and you'll have to clarify this for me, Sarah, it was the list that you provided to me from the food bank where you could actually purchase by the pound.
Okay, the inventory list?
I think it's the inventory list I went through. So on the standardized inventory list from the food bank, I looked to see what was available, plus what you got in that day.
Can you hold up the chart you're looking at?
It's page 12. Should be page 12. What I did is I went through the standardized inventory, looked to see what was on there, and tried to plug it into this chart so that you could see that there's some options that fit in with the science. Now this is what I came up with. But from a culinary perspective, when I now look at this, I'll say, okay, if I'm going to pull these ingredients, what can I put them into? Or what might, if I'm putting it into a box of goodies or what have you that I'm handing to my client, how might I compose that box? And how am I going to make up the gaps if I'm giving them a recipe, for example, or some meal ideas? Do you see what I'm talking about there? So we'll actually look at that a little bit this afternoon. So when I was here a month ago, I think the apples and cucumbers and limes had skids of those that came in. So of course I grabbed those right away in my mind. Said, there's my antioxidants. Omega-3s, there's always tuna. Of course, we always have that issue about how much tuna should you eat because of the, the heavy metal component. But I could grab tuna. What did we have that was in the sulfur-rich area? There were onions. It had horseradish sauce. Now it was highly processed. So I know. I called horseradish. And there was some different onions and miscellaneous produce that I knew I could use. And then on the slowly absorbed side, there were kidney beans. And that happened to be about that day. So as I started looking, I said, okay, I can start at least to get 3/4 of the way around my map, pulling things that would kind of fulfill what our bodies need to function. And that's what I mean by lifting up the plate and looking under deeper at the science, saying, what foods do we need? What do I need to help my body work properly? And what could we pull to constitute something that would be helpful for not only ourselves but our clients? And then from that, you put the chef or the cook hat on and say, okay, now what recipes do I now put together to suggest using these foods? Does that make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm seeing under the eggs if enriched with omega-3.
I know, I
How
put
in
it
the
there
world-
for you.
I know, but how does that work? How do they?
It will be from their feed or their free range.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just giving them supplements essentially.
Well, no, if you go back to the idea that grass, or you were here when I was talking about Iceland and the animals were feeding on the moss. Grass-fed, anything that's grass-fed changes the fatty acid profile from heavy in arachidonic acid if it's grain to heavier in omega-3s if it's a grass or a produce base. So that's where that's coming from. But there is fortified chicken feed too. I'm not a chicken farmer. Somebody would know better than me, but there's fortified feed. But yeah, your industrial eggs.
It's probably what eggs would have contained 100 years ago.
Yes, ma'am. That's
Now
right.
we're
gonna do that again instead
Well,
of
we are, yeah, we're going back to that. But it's interesting,
Yeah.
you take us back to that, because my husband's a hunter, and, you know, one of the things that some of the hunting clubs are struggling with is, you know, passing on that art and craft to younger people, and how important it is. You know, it's a cycle of life. It's sustainable in terms of managing herds, but it's also survival skills, you know, and it's free range. Yeah. So, but how far removed we are from that. So yeah. So you can see actually what I did is I took you all the way through the science from Daphne, all the way through to, is this idea something that could potentially shape how we shop here, or how we put together our items for our clients? Could this serve as a supplemental roadmap to guide us knowing how to put together what we're putting together to serve our clients? And that's where I wanted to get to today. So this, I put together. I also put one together a couple of years ago using TFAP commodity products, and I could fill everything, you know, but that's dwindled, I think, has it significantly, the TFAP, or to probably about nothing now, but that we were able to fulfill the entire map, yes.
Okay, and I'm sure we did this a half hour ago. You have nothing on the foods for digestive wellness.
Right, because I didn't find anything.
Okay. And what specifically would I want to find?
Well, let's answer that question.
Yeah.
What might we put there? What
Right.
could we put there?
Right.
Fermented foods.
The fermented, is that
The fermented food.
fermented?
Yes,
So-
or your dairy,
Right.
because dairy is not tolerated by a lot of
Right.
people. So I
Right.
try not to overemphasize that. I try to
Right.
be understanding. The other thing is, I think in food for digestive wellness, you should also think in your back of your mind that if you have a healthy gut, then you know, eating fruits and vegetables is going to support the gut too. So that could fit in there, but it's like this dollop of yum that goes on top. It's this
Right.
additional health supportive component that most of our clients are going to need, because we need it. I see it in mainstream health and medicine that we need it. So there you look at, okay, where are we going to get that from? That is a cooking lesson. You know, it's the art of cooking.
Yeah.
It's showing again that we can do this with cheap cabbage. And I don't mean to be sort of idyllic, but some of it is getting back to the basics. So all you need is salt and cabbage. But in stressed lives, that's a ridiculous thing, you know, to say. So your yogurt, your fermented products, and with some communities we're serving, fermented products are part of their lives. You know, this is not new. Yes, that's why, and you see why I left open herbs and spices, because it just depends, you know, what's available. Most people have something. It might be old, but they'll have something. So, yeah.
We were talking about cinnamon before. I've seen that in the vitamin aisle recently. How good is that?
Number one, I don't know.
Donated to our food bank. Do I put that out?
Is it a vitamin?
Yeah.
It goes back to, I don't think you can do any harm. But let me back up. As long as it's diabetic, though, and it depends what the dosage is, because that could be at a therapeutic level, although I don't know. If it was donated, it will not have come from a manufacturer whose practices I could speak better about.
It would have come from like CVS or Rite Aid or something like that.
Yeah, number one, we don't know about quality assurance. Number two, depending on the dosage in there, it could impact somebody's blood sugar. You know, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I would kind of go up the food chain on that one. That's almost, if it's a supplement, it could be considered a form of medicine too, depending on the person. So I would put that one at the flagpole. I don't want to answer, but thank you. Okay. So, did this make sense? It is a lot of information, yes. This is a fast workshop, so it takes digestion. That's why I wanted to put it out there, because we're going to do a couple of exercises, have lunch, do a little bit of culinary work, and then sort of pull it together. But like I said at the beginning, today was about giving some ideas for you for your health, but then presenting this tool as a pivot to, could this make a difference? Could this potentially be used in your work setting? How would it need to be changed? What does the language need to look like? Is it applicable? Because that's what we're interested in. can this be supportive to you?
Question. I think it's very applicable, but is there any handout, like a condensed handout we can give to our clients coming in a quick way of, you know?
That's what we're
going
getting
over
to.
this?
So the question is there a condensed handout? So you're seeing a big handout. This is more like a shopping handout, if you will, for you. The question is, for you, what should that handout look like? Now, the food bank worked very hard with me, and we came up with this. You should have this somewhere. It's our plate, and it is a first draft because we feel it's still far too complicated. Okay, and that's where your expertise comes in. Is would something like this work? If this won't work, but the idea works, excuse me, what should it look like? Because I don't know that answer. I know from teaching these ideas for many years across the nation that the way it's being taught absolutely resonates. But what that next piece of paper looks like is where your expertise would come in. So what we tried to do here is because, you know, my plate is the sort of governing symbol and guidelines, I tried to not step away from that. I mean, my map's completely different. So what we tried to do was integrate some of my ideas into the plate here. And we put a little nutrition key. We feel it's still too complicated. So therefore, what should it look like? What should it look like? But what we think is valuable. I'll speak for I, but I've talked to Sarah and Georgia about this. We think the idea resonates. And the idea really is that you could put something like that, depending on how you serve, whether it's a meal or whether it's a bag or box or whatever. What we'd like to do is put something in like this and then show how the foods that you put in the box fit. So you might write the foods here. So we have to come up with what does that look like? Is it a plate with a list, or what does it look like? And then show the recipes. Because in the recipes you train the ingredients they have in their box. But at least they can see how what you're giving them fits with their health. And here's the recipe, which you may have demoed or whatever. So that's what we probably will brainstorm before we leave today. Is how this has to sink in. You see where I'm trying to go, but what does that piece look like that would make it easy? Because you can see that this connects deeply to their health, but it connects what you're doing with the food. You thought about their health. You're showing them how it fits with their health. It's not just, hey, this is good for you, or here's this week's, or what have you. You thought about it. We care. So I don't have the answer yet. I'm trying.
This is a good start, though.
Need your insights because we think it's valuable. Yeah.
We have a food pantry, and how our guests shop is we've created a My Plate card.
Okay.
And according to how many in their family, that's how many of each of those categories they get.
Okay.
So I could see for us just extending what an example of a fruit is, what an example of a grain, even though we have it on, like color-coded, on the shelves. If it's grains, protein, we have that already done.
Okay. So just extend it out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they actually get a card that they shop with.
Oh yeah, that'd be
It's a
great.
self-select.
Okay, I'd like to see that too. That would be great. Okay, and you have
Right, well, our pantry is a choice pantry also, and people can select like 3 vegetables, 2 fruits, and then I try and I come every Thursday and get the produce so that there's always some fresh produce for folks to take. And I think we have something like this posted.
Right.
We have individuals who, you know, go through the process with folks and can explain things. So, I'm trying to work out how to.
Yeah.
The idea of choice is to give people, you know, sort of ownership of their shopping.
Exactly.
We're not just handing them stuff.
Absolutely, no.
So
absolutely.
to try and work in this is, you know, try and
Yeah, it's
guide
very
people
cerebral,
without,
isn't it?
right. But I like the.
Yeah, this was a first attempt at
Right.
trying to mesh something together, but it's still too complicated. And but I like that it's more than just categories. There's more thought behind it. So on that note, then, what I'd actually like to do is just to what we talked about in practice, just to put you in that space of selecting based on what we talked about this morning as opposed to my plate. And on your 13 here, page 13, I actually have a blank map where it's blank, so the outer edges aren't filled in. And what we want to attempt to do, or what we are going to do, is we're actually going to go out to, what's called
The shopping area.
the shopping area. And we're going to see, on the produce area, we're going to see if you can pull product to fit into these categories. Yeah, but I was thinking like if you work in sort of like groups of 3, something like that, so that you're not, although everyone's like bringing their stuff, so 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 or 4s, what have you, but otherwise there'll be nothing left out there, but maybe in 4s, when you work in 4s, groups of 4, 8, 12, then there'll be one group of 2, whatever. Yeah. You do that, or do you just want to count off your groups, or go with whoever's on your row?
So you want us grabbing?
Yes, I want you, yeah,
Getting this stuff in.
All the way around?
all the way around.
Okay.
See if you can do it, because that's application action.
Now, here you have like 4 slots. Are we supposed to have 4 different things?
No,
Okay.
just see, but grab them. See if you can find what you need. But at the back of your mind, there's the practical side of, okay, can I put something together with
That's
this?
what I was gonna say. They have to go
Yes.
together and then we're gonna do something with them.
You want actually to know we're doing something completely different this
Okay.
afternoon, because
But
I
that's
would not be able to control that. I don't know what's coming up, I need to control something. But it's really application. See if you can pull 1 or 2 things in the back of your mind. What you would potentially doing is writing it in here in the back of your mind. But then some kind of map will go to your client showing here's the ingredients we pulled, here's the recipe. So it's this map all the way from the science to ingredients you have, here's the recipe. Here's how it all fits in.
Okay.
To the back of your mind.